So, Professor New is a Powell M. Cabot Professor of American Literature at Harvard University, where she teaches classic American literature from Anne Bradstreet through Marilyn Robinson and from the Puritans to the present day. She's the author of New England Beyond Criticism in Defense of America's First Literature, The Regenerate Lyric, Theology and Innovation in American Poetry, the Lion's Eye, Poetic Experience, American Sight, and Jacob's Cane, a Jewish family's journey from the four lands of Lithuania to the ports of London and Baltimore. She also has a companion book to the Poetry in America project, How to Read American Poetry, forthcoming with Wiley Blackwell. And we'll give it over to Shanae.
Thank you. And everybody, it is our pleasure and honor to introduce Lisa New.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Somewhat astounded to see all of the places you are zooming in from. It's really an honor. Um, I thought I would begin by telling you a little bit about myself. And having heard that gracious introduction, I guess I need to start with that because it's changed. I'm a little bit different than how I was introduced, and I think that's part of the story I want to tell today. In fact, I am the Powell M. Cabot Professor of American Literature at Harvard, but I am now emerita, which means that I have retired from full-time teaching at Harvard. And the reason I did that, for those of you who, and I hope many of you were able to watch the television episode on Robert Lowell's July in Washington. If so, you may already know why I retired from Harvard, and that is that I've now have the opportunity to teach in a much bigger classroom on television, to take what I learned as a classroom teacher at Harvard and before that the University of Pennsylvania, to take that knowledge I developed as a scholar and teacher and to offer it on television to learners of all ages. For those of you who were able to watch Lowell's July in Washington before the session, and I'm excited to talk to you all about that. For those of you who were able to watch and who enjoyed it and maybe haven't read a lot of poetry before, and I would imagine many of you haven't read a lot of American poetry. If you want to watch more, there are 36 more poets that we cover in the four seasons of Poetry in America. They stream on our website, and we will, as well as on Amazon and other platforms, and we will provide that material in the resources that will go with the recording of this lecture. In addition, any of you who are surprised by today's session, enjoy poetry in a way that you didn't know you would and would like to follow us on social media, please do so. It's exciting to me and a pretty unusual experience to be speaking to so international a group of learners, and I'd love to include you in our larger community. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then I thought what I would do is share with you some new things that I've observed about Robert Lowell's July in Washington as a way to give you maybe some tools and some tricks that you can carry away yourself to help you read other poems by Lowell or other poems by other poets. But first about me, I began teaching at the college level in the mid 1980s, a long time ago, well before most of you were born. I began my career teaching at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I taught there for 10 years. And then in 1989, I moved to Harvard, where I taught for until I recently retired, where I taught for around 20 years. My favorite classes, the ones I really enjoyed teaching, were when students had to fill a requirement. I'm sure wherever it is, whatever whatever university or college you're studying at right now, there are probably courses that are required of you, and you probably go in suspicious of them or maybe not liking them just because they are required. Just because the choice was taken away from you. Students at Harvard were all required and still are to do something in the arts or humanities. And I taught a course called Poetry in America that served those students. And the challenge for me was to take a subject that students thought they would not like, that they thought was a waste of, that they might have thought was a waste of their time, um, and to make them love it. that that was the goal. And what I really tried to do all the time, and I'm going to try to do it with you, we'll see how it goes, um, is to encourage students to travel in their imaginations. That poetry is a kind of transportation. It's a Emily Dickinson called it like flying. It is a way to use your mind to go somewhere else. Let me say, by the way, that I think in case you want to explore poetry more than you have before, one of the things I love to do whenever I travel almost anywhere, is I try to look up the poems that were written about that place. And as I arrive, whether I'm going to Japan, where I went last year, or whether I'm going to the American West, where I travel frequently. I'll be going, I'll actually be in Rwanda later this year. I try to find poems written by the writers living there, or poems of travelers visiting, as a way to more fully experience my arrival in that place. Now, when we read poetry, when we're not traveling, it's sometimes hard to imagine just what it is that the poet is writing about, in particular, if we've never been to the place, or never been to the place before, never had the experience before, to specify and get closer to the poem we will talk about today. Many of you, for instance, probably most of you, have not been to Washington, D.C. Perhaps some of you have. We can talk about that later. I'll be interested in the chat. Maybe those of you who have been to Washington, D.C. can let us know in the chat and we can get a kind of tally. But if you haven't been there, you probably don't know that it's a city whose design is around a series of circles. You just don't know that. Just you, and even if you flew into Washington, D.C. and you stayed near the federal buildings in the center of the city, you might still not know that the city was designed as a series of circles. And if you haven't been there, you might not know that there are statues of commanding figures on horseback often being displayed in the center of those circles. And you might not know how hot it is in Washington. I mean, many of you I saw around the world live in places that can get pretty warm in the summer too. But Washington in the United States is famously humid and sweltering in the summer. If you've never been there, when you read the title July in Washington, it might be that a set of associations are not fully present to you. And so I, as a classroom teacher, for many years understood that my students might need a little more context. And as a classroom teacher, I began pretty early in my career to bring in pictures. Like I eventually I had a little suitcase, a little rolling suitcase I would bring to class, and it would have pictures and cassette tapes of music and objects that you might not have thought about how they really looked until you really looked at them. That is, I began earlier in my career to think about teaching poetry as a highly dimensional experience that required more media. Poets, after all, use their language to look at all sorts of things in the world and to help us imagine them. Uh, but sometimes we haven't seen them before, and a poet's reference might not be intelligible to us. And so, as a classroom teacher, for many years, I would just bring stuff in. I'd play music. The poet might refer to Billie Holiday or Pablo Casals or somebody, and I'd say the poet might refer to the Empire State Building or the Eiffel Tower, or you kind of want to know what those things look like. This is a long way of saying that when I had the opportunity to make media on poetry, when it wasn't just dragging my little suitcase around and passing pictures on paper around a classroom, that seemed like a really exciting thing for me to be able to do. And as soon as I began discovering what one can do with video, it a whole new way of educating people on the subject of poetry, whether educating them in formal classrooms or in their living rooms on television. A whole new way of educating them began to occur to me. And a decade later, what I now do, rather than simply teach at Harvard University, which I enjoyed for many years, what I now do is create online educational materials on poetry and the humanities, and this television series that some of you, I hope, have seen. The episode you've seen, July in Washington, in fact began as a piece of an online course, a course that I offer now to students globally through Arizona State University, where I now also lead a center in educational media innovation. So there we have a little bit about me, a little background, which I think for students of your age, how people become what they become, how they do what they do, it's kind of always interesting. I never expected that I would leave being a classroom instructor, college instructor, in order to make a television series. I'm really pretty passionate about poetry as a scholarly subject. And yet, I guess it's an example of one of those surprises that can happen in life, that the opportunity to do a different kind of teaching um, uh, presented itself to me mid-career, and now I do things differently. So now what I would like to do is talk with you for a while about poetry. And I bet there are hundreds of you out there who read poetry, and I'm eager to hear from you. And I bet there are hundreds of you out there who do not read poetry. And it's my hope that some of the things I'm about to say, like what I share on the television series, will it's my hope that it will meet the needs of those of you who don't read poetry and don't understand and find it mystifying or confusing, and those of you who do read it. Why do I love poetry? Well, it started when I was a little girl and I read picture books. Um, so many picture books for little children are written in rhymed verse. Children have a delight and a delight in rhyme. And I mean, we think about the way they begin speaking. I actually have some new grandchildren, and I'm listening to them they'll go, ligga, 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 ligga. Any place you go, if you listen to a baby, they're making rhythmic sounds. They're delighting in rhythmic sounds. The foundations of language begin in languages musicality. In any case, when I was a little kid, beyond the age of saying liga 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 or ba 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 or pa 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 pa, beyond that stage, and I started to read poems with pictures, the joy that came first of looking at a beautifully illustrated picture and then at the language that referred to that picture. The joy was made an impression on me that I will really never get over. What made an even bigger impression is that when I grew up and we subtracted some of those pictures, the pictures in the children's book, my mind still made the pictures. Kind of amazing when you look at black print on a page and that the language on a page can conjure pictures. How does it do that? How does the word blue, B-L in English, B-L-U-E, it's just some sounds. How does it make you see sky? That connection was so moving to me. I became fascinated by how, if you rearrange the words of a sentence, something that sounded funny can begin to sound sad. The way tone, the way all the feeling states that we experience as human beings can be encoded or recorded in written language. I loved historical fiction as well as poetry when I was a little girl, and the way a text could, and this goes back to the metaphor of travel, the way a text could deliver me into another place. Like I loved reading books about people who lived in the country. I didn't live in the country. I loved reading about wheat fields and about meadows. And I loved reading about earlier times, the 18th century, the 19th century. I loved reading about people, the time when women wore long dresses and we rode in carriages. I was fascinated by all of that. And that my mind could transport me to those places simply through language was, um, sort of miraculous to me. Now, a more grown-up way of saying all of this is that Poetry, like any art form, and I'm going to talk in a minute about a few others, poetry is a powerful lens that engages us more fully in our world, helps us have experience of our experience by slightly altering, by giving us a version of the world that's different, that's different from how it actually is. That a vision of the world filtered through an imagination. And I I have this Matisse poster in my office, in my study here in Brookline, Massachusetts, near Boston, where I'm sitting now. And I realized this morning that this was a good example of what I mean. This is sort of what this poster by Matisse, by the French painter Matisse, is a poster of is a representation of a, you can see this, of a bowl of fruit on a table next to a window that has some curtains and has some shutters, right? We know that. We can see it's abstract, but it's not that abstract. And yet, if we and we know what the objects are, but they've been changed. They've been changed in what's changed? Well, the depth of the scene has been flattened so that the table seems to sit right on the wall, right? All of the almost experimentally, what happens if we're not using our depth perception? The objects have all been simplified so that even though there's a we can see there's a shutter with black crosshatch, and we can see that there's a curtain with a kind of zigzag pattern, and that there's a tree outside the window. Shutter, curtain, and tree have been rendered just as color, as a set of sort of geometric shapes and colors. And so that what we're seeing, we're filtering out objects, we're filtering out the distinction between objects, and we're looking just at color and shape. And now we can see, and that green patch is so large that it seems to act as a sort of mirror for the green plate on which the fruit sits, that we might not even notice. If we were in just walking by our table in life, we would not notice that there is a kind of correspondence there between. Anyway, you can see I'm getting very excited talking about this painting, but I'm going to move on um, to the poem in a moment. What all art forms enable us to do is to see the world more vibrantly, sometimes more selectively, sometimes more overwhelmingly, through the lens of a particular artist's vision. And so I'm just crazy about artists' visions. And and Robert Lowell is an artist whose vision is immensely rewarding to study. Here, I've shared with you one poem by Robert Lowell. I made a television episode on one poem by Robert Lowell. These are Robert Lowell's poems. There are so many of them. He had bipolar disorder, what we used to call manic depression, and part of the reason way he dealt with it is he wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. What's fascinating to me, and I hope will be rewarding for you, is that once you've read this poem by Robert Lowell, you will be able to read any poem. You will have the tools to read any poem by Robert Lowell, as well as the poems of other poets as well. Now, there are many ways in which a poet's vision develops, and it's often very personal. And you may have ideas about a poet. A poet is somebody really emotional, you might think. That's a classic thing to think. Well, some poets are very emotional, or poets love nature, you might think. And that's true of some poets, but there are many different ways that a poet's personality and way of looking at the world sort of encodes itself in a style. Some poets are intrinsically performers, right? There's always an audience, there's always a crowd. You read the language, even if you read it on the page, and you hear an orator or a singer who's talking to you. And some poets are not performers at all. They're, some, I feel like I want to broaden this point a little bit more and say poets emerge often out of cultures whose preoccupations and traditions shape them. So many of you have probably read some Japanese haiku. Uh, Japanese haiku captures a set of values within Japanese culture, traditional values within Japanese culture that, for instance, value the glimpse of a the particular glimpse you would have of a garden when you turn a corner, the glimpse that you didn't have before you turned the corner and that you won't have after you turn another corner. Haiku says it's this instant, it's this view, and it's what I feel about it right then, right? And that's part of the why haiku is very short. A lot of poetry from Islamic cultures and many of you are from those cultures. A lot of poetry from Islamic cultures is very much concerned with the transcendence of the self and the discovery of something larger than the self, whether it is the realm of the spirit or community. But there is a movement, and I'm working right now on a television episode on the uh, based on the work of Rumi, 11th century Muslim cleric, where that poetry absolutely depends on a kind of motion that comes out of Islam, this motion out of self-absorption. So there are many, many different ways in which poetry operates. Here, I'm going to just spend the next 15 minutes or so talking to you about Robert Lowell's particular vision, and I'm mindful that many of you saw this television episode and you might think, well, that's all there is to say about this poem. What I'd like to demonstrate to you here is that even though, believe me, I had thought a great deal about what I was going to put in this television episode, and which cost a lot of money to make, and I really did think about it a lot. There is an inexhaustibility about great works of art where there are so many questions that work of art raises. And I know that in a few minutes, some of you are going to raise some of those questions. I asked you to think about, for instance, excuse me, I'm going to drink for a minute. I asked you to think about, to choose, what are the three words in this poem that give you the sense of how Robert Lowell feels, how he feels about his time, how he feels about his nation. And after I offer a few more thoughts, we are going to talk about that. And I am absolutely confident that you will be bringing words that I did not treat in this television episode and that I am not going to say anything about right here. So, but here goes. Robert Lowell is fascinating to me um, because he's a citizen. Robert Lowell writes from the point of view of a citizen, a member of a national community, a responsible citizen, a person of conscience, a person responsible to its history, to the history of his nation, and a sufferer of its failings, right? As we citizens are, wherever we are from, if we are engaged. And so this position of an engaged citizen, um, compelled to look closely at the nation of which he is a part. For those of you who saw the television episode, you know that poor Robert Lowell, he was born into a family that was part of the founding of the United States. And so his sense of burden is especially heavy. He feels like my family was there at the beginning. We were responsible for some things going wrong. I'm implicated. Um, and so Robert Lowell for me is a poet I love to read as a witness on history, on as a witness on his times, as someone who is looking closely, and his times are the 50s through the 70s, right? He writes in the 1940s as well, but his times are those mid-century American ones that we would use in the United States. We'd use the word Cold War. It's the era of decolonization across the rest of the world. And I didn't pick this poem for this group accidentally because of its geopolitical, of the way in which it is geopolitically accountable. I thought it would be interesting for this group. So here's some things that I didn't show you in the television episode, and that I would just call attention to here as part of a little kit of tricks for reading a poem that you can carry away with you. This poem, July in Washington, begins, "The stiff spokes of this wheel touch the sore spots of the earth." Remember when I said that you might, if you hadn't been to Washington, D.C., you might not know that the whole city has been designed as a series of circles? It's for that reason that it's helpful to have pictures and images so that you know that. And for those of you who saw the episode, you know how much attention we paid to those wheels. Here's something I'm marveling at right now, and that you, as a reader of poetry, can pay attention to. Lowell is a poet who's using sound. He's using the way the words sound to make his point. Listen to this. "The stiff spokes of this wheel touch the sore spots of the earth." Um, there are 6 evenly stressed syllables in "stiff spokes of this wheel," then a sort of pause, touch, and then 6 more, "the sore spots of the earth." That can you see the way the rhythm of those lines is engineered? That's this poet has engineered the rhythm so that it's almost as though the spokes of the wheel just kind of lock into or sink into the sore spots of the earth. There's this magical use of a slight pause in the middle of the sentence. You see that? The stiff spokes of this wheel touch the sore spots of the earth. And we're going to see more of those. Now, you are probably noticing, you're thinking, why is she just talking about the rhythm when there are so many P's and T's, stiff spokes, sore spots? And can you see how the stiff spokes, these sharp things, are poking right into the sore spots from the way the poet, and how is that happening? Well, it's coming from those sharp P's and T's um, that um, that have the first line of this poem essentially stabbing into the second line. Sore spot is a colloquial idiom as well. If you say if you're touchy, we would use the word touchy. It's interesting that he used touch. If you and I had a disagreement that was kind of chronic, we were always disagreeing with each other, I'd say, and you touched it. I go, oh, no, 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 that's a sore spot. That means don't touch me there. I'm uncomfortable. Well, that phrase that we apply to ourselves, I'm a little sensitive, is here being used figuratively to describe nations around the world, right, that are being poked by the stiff spokes of this wheel, which is, as some of you saw in our in the episode. I have no idea how many of you were able to see it. I hope you'll watch after if you weren't able to. But if you saw, you know that this wheel is the great wheel of the capital, Washington, which is poking at, right? And in the 1960s, America is poking at Southeast Asia, Africa, places in South of America, places whose histories um, you all know. Interesting, and so the sound, we learn just from the first two lines of this poem that Lowell is a poet who's going to be using sound in order to convey meaning. Those of you who saw the episode know that the circles that are introduced in the wheel in the beginning of this poem continue right on through. And so we have traffic circles, we have wheels, we have dimes, we have any number of round things. And there's almost a kind of, just as in this painting, we are abstracting. There's a kind of abstract narrative going on. In this poem, Lowell, we might say Lowell is taking sharp things and soft things. Sharp things, and if you just go through this poem and look for sharp things and soft things, and you'll be able to make a catalog. Let's put some sharp things on this side. Let's put some soft things on this side. Here's some sharp things are spokes, power launches. If you jump down to the fifth couplet, prongs and spearheads, notice how Lowell is using P's. He's not only giving us sharp things. He's cueing us, cluing us in with sound, that sharp things often use P sounds, spears, prongs, spokes. Um, so we got sharp things and soft things, and then he makes things a little ambiguous. And where the power of poetry, the real power of poetry, often comes from is that unclarity, where the unclarity we live with every day, since nothing is quite as clear as we want to make it. Everything is a little bit ambiguous. And so a question raised, say, let's say we've developed our catalog of soft things and sharp and pointy things. What's an otter or a raccoon? Some of you, otters are soft, furry, rat-like swimming creatures. And so are raccoons. They seem soft and vulnerable, but here in this poem, they are a bit menacing, right? And is softness is, and we are given to wonder about whether aggression looks like aggression, or whether sometimes aggression might wear a velvet glove, as for instance in the last lines of the poem, where we say, the least little shove would land us there. This is a poem, for those of you who have seen the episode, and we will talk about it in a minute, that is about the exertion of power, right? It's about America exerting power and symbolizing its power in the world, and that power doesn't always use a prong or a spear. Sometimes what it uses is a statue or the architecture of a Capitol building, or um, or language more ambiguous and guarded. I'm going to wrap up in, I think I'm only going a few minutes over my 45 minutes, which isn't too terrible. We're gonna speak in a minute, but I wanted to share with you here. I have some dimes. You might remember in this poem. Um, so the poem begins, I'm going to remind you, the poem begins by looking at public buildings in Washington, D.C., on the Potomac. And then it makes a little turn and it begins to talk about the elected officials, the government officials who come to Washington. And it uses this image, the elect, the elected, they come here bright as dimes and die disheveled and soft. There's something about the long eye of bright as dimes that's hard and sharp and defined. And not only does Lowell name, right, and he's basically saying people come to Washington full of clear clarity and purpose and character, maybe. And then they kind of soften and fold in on themselves. And it's a fascinating metaphor to call people dimes. It suggests that they're bought and paid for. It suggests the economics of politics in all sorts of interesting ways. But I took out some dimes this morning. I don't know how many of you, so you guys can look up a dime online. And what I noticed is that on the dime, I should have known this, is the president from the late 50s, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And Lowell is writing all the time. Dwight Eisenhower is sort of the American politician. And so the fact that he's using dimes just as a figure of speech, as a figurative image, but also he's really thinking, he's naming, and maybe he's saying that Dwight Eisenhower, the great general of World War II, got soft, got disheveled and soft by using the image of the dime. I'm going to give one more example of something I observed um, recently with admiration about this poem that I hadn't seen before, and that is the line that is the in the second to last couplet. Um, Distant hills powdered blue as a girl's eyelid. Distant hills powdered blue as a girl's eyelid. There is something, I mean, how would that line be different if it was distant hills as blue as a girl's eye? It's completely different from powdered blue as a girl's eyelid. Powdered blue as a girl's eyelid makes it completely contemporary to the 1960s when everybody was powdering, all the girls were powdering their eyes blue. It makes it a little, it makes it frivolous and also incredibly attractive and alluring and sexy, even. It makes A Dream of America a kind of both innocent and irresistible. Um, and to add to all of that, distant hills, powdered blue. Just listen to the use of those D's and L's, right? Distant hills, how it takes a master craftsman of a poet to begin a line with distant hills and then end with eyelid, that brings, right, there's a the where there's a compression of and an integration of sound that takes nothing away from the meaning and is almost um um you might not even notice it, and yet it sharpens our understanding. So what I have shared with you, oh, I didn't sing to you. We wish the river had another shore. We wish the river had another shore. There's an example not of not of use of sound or of imagery, but of a kind of allusion, a way of gesturing barely to another text or another. In this case, I hear Michael row the boat ashore, which is a spiritual Michael row the boat ashore. Hallelujah. Michael row the boat ashore. Hallelujah. That song goes on, invoking the Holy Land, milk and honey on the other side, hallelujah. I'm sorry, I'm singing. It's not that pretty, but so Lowell also seems to be invoking even the civil rights movement here with we wish our aspiration is for a larger a more beautiful America than the one I have represented with this wheel with its sharp spokes. So I think with that, I'm going to open things up to all of you. I have to tell you, it's weird. You're more used to it than I am. it's kind of weird to be talking to hundreds and hundreds of people without seeing any of them, but you guys are used to it. And thank you for your patience as I shared. I I I thought it might be fun to ask some of you, Fabricio, I see, and I think Morgan, I'm going to let you guys call on people rather than I do it, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Morgan and yeah, and Shanae. Um, I asked you all to think about three words or images that you think best express the poet's feelings about the US, whatever that means to you. And if you could share one of those words and why it struck you the way it did, I bet that will be enlightening for all of us.
Yeah, I think so. So, Fabricio, since you have your hand raised, I guess you'll be our volunteer. So if you could unmute again and you can re give your reply to the prompt that the professor gave.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the masterclass, Professor New. Well, talking about the poem, I can resolve the sharps, the ways, no, that he refers to the globes, to the circles. Many emphasize in that shape, no, circle,
Yeah.
a city full of circles. Now, besides that, I have two questions for you. As Aspire is a program from leaderships, I wanna ask you how practicing poetry can help develop uh, skills. I don't know if that's the exactly word, to develop empathy, uh, many characteristics like creativity. It's one I think you develop practicing poetry, and how can you as a person can attach to your culture from poetry. And my second question
Oh my gosh, that was two
is
already. That was two. So I
okay.
asked you a question. I'm gonna do the first two, okay? And then
Okay.
we can, okay. The question about empathy is a terrific one. And I think in some ways what we've seen in this poem is maybe an example. I mean, I think, where does empathy come from? It comes from an understanding that things are complicated for everyone, right? That that life is full of hard choices and of decisions that are really not clear, right? And and some of the questions the this poet is asking through these images are, should we try to control the rest of the world, right? Should we try to touch Vietnam and Brazil and decolonizing African countries? Is that our business? Should we try to touch them? And the poet, and we want to be alike, we want to help, right? We want to be good. And this poem seems to be showing us that we might be reaching out and poking at sore spots, right? And that all of life is really like that. I think poets have a tolerance for the ambiguity, for the way we feel two things at once, right? I mean, in our world today, it most of us are feeling two things at once about almost everything, right? And so I think when you read poetry like this, where a poet will end, the least little shove will get us there. That's what everybody who invades a country says. We just need a little bit more, just a little shove, not a big shove, just a little shove. And you can see him saying, little shove. It's just a little shove. I'm not gonna roll over this country. I'm just gonna do a little shove, just enough to help them, right? This this poet gives us all of the complexity of one nation interfering with others and where the beauty of its ideals and the uh, harm of its actions are both true. So that's my empathy question. That's my answer to the empathy.
Mhm.
And I think to understand one's own culture, I think it's really, and I've been doing this more and more, when you gather, if you take a poem, a poem, a painting, a work of music, all from the same period, sort of about the same thing, by a poet interested, by artists interested in their country. And I gave the example of Japanese painting, Japanese gardening, Japanese poetry are all often after the same experience of a sort of serenity, a kind of meditative serenity. That's reductive. There's lots of other things going on in Japanese art, but that's one thing. That's one thing. And I think that a little gathering of artists sometimes tells you something that journalists don't, right? That they see more deeply. Now, but I asked you all a question, which was, and if you don't want to answer my questions, that's okay. I'll if you push back, I'll submit. That's okay. But but I did ask, and maybe somebody, I loved your questions, by the way, but maybe somebody would say, what are the words, the real feeling words, the words that tell you, oh, this is how he really feels. And it's fun to just pick one or two or three. Who's got one?
Yeah, let's move forward. Out of the folks that are here with their camera on, did anyone want to take a stab at highlighting some of the feeling words that are in the poem that you guys should have read? I can also call on somebody. All right, well, looks like I'll call on somebody. I see Valeria here in Russia. So Valeria, I'll ask you to unmute. I'll also share the my screen again so we can have the poem handy.
It's if Valeria, if you didn't read the poem before, did you read this before?
Actually, I read
It's
some
okay. You don't
poem,
have to confess.
and I think we need to analyze from the screen. Yeah.
I'm sorry, would you say that again?
We need to analyze some lyrics from the screen. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm
So yeah,
having to,
Valeria, so the poem is on screen. Now you're going to
yes,
pick two words or maybe one word
just
that
one word that
just
sort of expresses the feelings.
Well,
That's
this
okay.
one is really beautiful. I just have no idea or words. This poem is new for me.
Okay.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
Well,
No
we
worries.
have a bunch of people raise their hands, so maybe there's some others.
Yes, I see Muskan here has their hand raised. So Muskan, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hello, I'm really glad to be a part of this session.
Hi.
I would like to say this poem paints a very vivid picture. As someone who's very into poetry and also someone who paints quite often, I
Mm,
can see it, like the colors are very vivid in front of me. So I'd say it's romanticism and personification in a way because the line that stuck out to me was the blue eyeshadow one, the powdered thing. And I had a question for you. I am usually a very cynical person, so the first thought that came under on my head was, what if the person is hiding something under the powders, the eyeshadow, under the makeup? Like, what is the country hiding? So usually in poetry, we romanticize a lot. So I love the city of London, I love the city of Oxford, and I've read a lot of poetry regarding those places. But I also understand that there are a lot of geopolitical issues going in the country. And I don't think a lot of poetry addresses that. Some people do. So I had a question for you. How do we connect with other poets from around the world who address both the positive, negative, and the neutral aspects of these deep societal issues?
Well, I mean, once again, I'd like to go back to the first. Could we go
Yeah.
back to your first
Yes,
point,
of course, of course.
which
Yes.
I thought was absolutely um, brilliant, if I may say, that yes, I think the eyeshadow is hiding something. And this poet seems to be asking about what the beauty of Washington might be hiding. Now, does that mean the beauty is completely inauthentic? A girl with powdered eyeshadow is not necessarily completely inauthentic. She might be charming. I don't know. If you watch the episode, you saw the wonderful 1960s ads of girls wearing blue eyeshadow, and you may have enjoyed it. But another example of precisely that observation that you've just made is on the Potomac, swan white power launches keep breasting the sulfurous wave. So a power launch is like a motorboat, and swans, what is more beautiful than a swan? Right? We think, oh, swan, what everybody knows what a swan is? It's a gorgeous bird. We think of it as the most beautiful bird. But but Lowell's image here is of this soft, beautiful thing cutting through the water of Washington, cutting just like the prongs and the spears. That is an exact counterpart to your point about the deception in the eyeshadow. And deception as a kind of softening is actually essentially what this poem is about. Um, I mean, I think you all should tell me, the poets from your country, you think. I would be presumptuous to be telling you, for those of you who do read the poetry of your country, who are the poets? Who are the poets who are looking at, say, and I asked you this question, who are looking at capital cities and looking at the way, what does a capital city do? It celebrates itself. It celebrates its heroes. It celebrates its history. It celebrates, and it does so through architecture, through statuary. That's how, that's, and what, and often they're poems inscribed on the statues in your, right? Aren't there in your culture? That's why I asked you all, what do some of the monuments in your culture say about your culture or your capital city? Anybody want to try that one? That's what this poem for me allows you to think about capital cities. Doesn't have to be Washington. What's a capital? What are human beings? What what idealism do they build into their capital cities, and how do their capital cities maybe fall short of that idealism? We got many raised hands. Why don't we just listen to some of you?
All right, I see a hand raised by Noor. Noor, I'd love to hear from you.
Hello, my name is Noor. I'm from Egypt. So I'm going to
Hi.
be talking about ancient Egypt. The capital was Luxor, and I've been there recently. There's so many grand statues and poetry on the walls, and they're all about stories of wars and victories mostly, because this is the writing of the the temples, the priests, they want to tell the story. But
Hmm.
the contradiction is you see that it's in ruins now. There's not much to see. There is no one there to, you know, uh, witness it in the same greatness as you prescribed. You bring media to poetry, but there is no such thing to old history. I think it's what makes it interesting. I also want to really thank you for your energy. It's very contagious.
Oh,
When I
well,
speak for everyone, it's very positive. I love it.
oh, thank you. That's so nice of you. That's so nice of you to say, but I love that example. Egypt and Robert Lowell wrote many poems about capital cities. I mean, he studies the empires and he translated, and often he writes poems about ruins, about ruined cities, and poems about, I mean, there's many, many poems, from all over the world about ruined cities that offer us the vision that today's victors are tomorrow's dust, right? And Lowell isn't quite he's not quite turning us to dust, but here's another theme in this poem. You've got the statuary, the grandeur of the built environment, and then you've got like animals and plants. And if you're in Washington in the summer, anyone who's ever been, and when you get to go to Washington, and I was just there in July for weeks. It was it's swampy, and you feel like animal life. You feel like the swamp is going to envelop the lawnmowers are going all the time, so they're cutting it back. But that the imagery here, like what you just said of Luxor, is all things all things pass. And this is a poem about the American Empire right here. And Lowell's not so sure. He's not so sure about what the American Empire is up to. I'm fascinated by this poem, by the way, because it is 60 years old. It's 60 years old, and it could have been written yesterday. Not everyone would feel the way this poet feels, but it could have been written yesterday. Um, who else? Bunch of others.
Thanks so much. Jumping around a bit, I see a hand raised by Al Danush. So, Danush, if you'd like to unmute, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Danush.
Thank you. So, am I audible?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa, for this wonderful session. Literally, your energy was highly contagious. When you were going through the poem, I think in the middle, there was one stanza where girl's eyelid and ears were compared. The similar proverb is there in can you go through the Google Doc?
One
Wait.
quick moment, I'll share that.
Yeah,
All right, let's keep this up.
let's keep it up.
Little bit down. No, correct, it's okay. Distant is powder blue as a girl's eyelid. This was used in many Indian languages like a proverb. When somebody wants to try new things, when somebody wants to move to capital city or biggest cities in the country or in the state, the people near to themselves. If you look a city which is very far from you, which is very big, looks nice from here, but it was not that much nice when you go in front of it. That thing I can feel from the poem.
How
And this,
you're saying it's romanticized. It's distant, and so it's being romanticized. That's fabulous. Is that
yeah,
is that your
yeah,
it,
it's romanticized. We are what we can say told in the first at the starting. We apply filters, like when we know the things from the distant, we romanticize the things from the reality, and we will take whatever we want.
Those were 2 points. Those were two very interesting points. The first, that we romanticize things that are far away and we make them far away in order to romanticize them. Um, but also, what was the second one? What was the second one? Sorry, I just forgot it. It was very good. If you
This the second one is we will take whatever we want to take, like
Oh,
what we are
oh, oh,
interested
the
in.
second one goes to distant places being we don't think of them as quite real.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's what the prongs, right, on the great spokes of this wheel touch the sore spots of the earth, right? On it, that's right. And it's just that um it's the geographic distance. I mean, we're still wrestling with this, right? These issues are absolutely with us this moment, today. Who else? That was great.
Thank you so much, Danush. All right, I see quite a few more hands raised, jumping around a bit. I see a hand raised by Nyasha Kembo. So Nyasha, if you'd like to unmute, we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me. Um, the most intricate line that I liked from this poem was they come here bright as diamonds and die. Um,
Yeah, disheveled and
aha,
soft.
yeah, that one. That line really reflects the trajectory idea of people who come to capital cities. For example, I come from Zimbabwe, and then our capital city, like when everyone goes to the capital city, they have this idea of that they're gonna meet new things, they're gonna develop themselves, and then they're gonna make a lot of money in
Oh
capital
yeah.
cities. But when they get to those capital cities, like their hopes are literally shutting down because there's that harsh reality of the political instabilities, or they have to compromise with a lot of things in the capital cities. So I think like that line really speaks emotion to me.
I yes. And I hear that, and the disappointment, right? There's something about it's not just that they fail. It's that they
Yes.
die disheveled and soft, which they lose their edge. It's the line it's disappointing and a little humiliating. And how did he manage to capture that ambition deflated and the embarrassment of it in that image? Thank you so much for that. That is absolutely right, I think.
Thank you. All right, another hand I see raised. I'm jumping around a bit, but I see a hand raised by Sabina. So Sabina, if you'd like to unmute, we'd love to hear from you next.
Hello, dear Professor New. Thank you for giving us chance for listen to this amazing session. I really appreciate this. My name is Sabina, and I'm participating from Azerbaijan. And my question is, it will be according to poetry. What might Lowell mean by willing river had another shore? Is this the desire for political change or escape or something else? Thank you for it.
Well, I want to know what okay, so here's my question back to you and to all of you. It's another thing I noticed in the poem after I made a whole television episode about it that I didn't. Midway through the poem, we start to hear the word we. We cannot name their names or number their dates, circle and circle like rings on a tree, but we wish the river had another shore. There's something that we does. Can I throw it back to you, Sabina? What do you think?
What I'm thinking
What do
about
you
this.
think? Well, you asked me, what do I think he means by we wish the river, is there is there some different outcome, some different kind of political outcome, or some further beautiful place for us to go? I mean, this seems also to have like the American frontier in it. Like we've hit the end. So yes, I think it's that, but there's something very tender about we wish. We wish. Somebody say something about wishing? We wish. What's the tone of that? What's the feeling of that? We wish. Politicians never say we wish, actually. Maybe we'd be better off if they said we wish. Who's got any idea on that?
Okay. Let's see here. I see Leslie Gonzalez. Leslie, I'll give you the chance to unmute. And again, we would love to hear your thoughts.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Uh, oh my God, I'm so nervous now. At the same time, I'm excited to be here with all of us, and especially with our
Hi,
professor.
Leslie.
And I think when you talk about the capital city previews, I was thinking, what is capital city? Like the resources, or maybe the capital of my country, because I am from Peru. And then I think even or the treasure, no, what is the capital? I think here the poetry in my country will really use and focus, and many, like I heard in my classmates, the literature here is more for rural district, just to shout about violence or count histories that are not really count, because there is a rural district, there is a no other reality maybe that is unknown, and this is just one to be here, be there. So I think that could be related with when you ask about we. Yes, is we maybe a community, maybe a society. And at the same time, the literature, I think, is really connected with history, right? Because there is a line, and it depends, like, in what moment the Robert Lowell write that poem, just what is going on in the world, or maybe in their country. And at the same time, I think we can keep these things together and to analyze and start critical thinking, right? It's just, another story that you know, and you can improve. And I think it's more democratic that maybe impact and other things. In real words, I think it's one thing with part of others. Yes, you have to decide what you want to
I
hear.
I think I hear you. I mean, you too, you all say you're saying a lot of things, many ideas. And I think part of the reason you're doing that is that these poems are so rich, and that there a lot of these ideas are all coming bundled and clustered together, and that's why the poems give us empathy, because we because they're much more subtle than some of the political debates we have. But I think I hear you talking about, you use the word community, and there's a solidarity that when this poem introduces, how many lines in, how many couplets in, introduces the word we go, oh, am I part of that? Is this me? And is it, and so one, I mean, most of you here are not American, probably almost, all of you. So but I think we've been talking about this poem as it speaks to any country's capital and any country's challenges of leadership and of matching ideals and action, right? And it's matching power to compassion, right? How do we balance those? And I find we wish sounds, again, it's so vulnerable. It's vulnerable in a different way than disheveled and soft. Disheveled and soft is, I'm a balloon, I've been pierced, I'm like, "Ugh," right? I've lost it. I've lost all my spine. We wish is I find it very touching, very, very human. And it's almost as though this poem is looking for a certain kind of softness, a certain kind of authenticity. And when we get back to, let me point out what many of you probably already noticed, that shore and shove, shore and shove. Sure, we wish the river had another shore. There's so much idealism there. One little shove, a shove is not gentle. The least little shove will get us there. Isn't that what nations always do? They aspire to another shore and they just say, oh, we just need to exert a little bit of force. That's what human beings do, right? Just one little shove. That brilliant one little shove would land us there. Whew, that's powerful poetry.
Wonderful.
Who else? We have a few more minutes. You guys are great. I could go for a long time with hundreds of you.
Yeah, I think we definitely have time for at least one more question. So jumping around a bit, I see a physical hand raised by Mohammed. So Mohammed, I'll ask you to unmute and we would love to hear from you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So I just want to ask one question specifically because throughout, if you see down the lane in the history, great leaders are often very good storytellers. So in the
Ah,
field of particularly with literature and poetry, we as a person who is very novice trying to learn new things, how can we develop the characteristics or the criteria which is required to be a good storyteller, and how can we be visionary and more empathetic while writing our stuff or being with there in public? So just I want to know what is the recipe for being a good storyteller.
oh, I
That's
wish
a
I could
very
give you
straight.
a recipe. Well, I think this is a real paradox, and there's a tension here and an
Yeah.
ambiguity here.
Mm-hmm.
I think Robert Lowell here is quite a good storyteller.
Yeah.
He's telling a very complicated story.
Mm-hmm.
He would be a really terrible leader. And I am wondering whether, we
Mm-hmm.
talk about narrative, narrative, narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's talking about narrative. The narratives we are asked to take in are so simple, right? It's either this or that,
Yeah.
right? And so I personally am concerned that that politicians have taken over too much of the storytelling, and maybe if more of the storytelling was in the hands of poets, and there are certainly nations, countries around the world where poets are revered for, back to the Iliad and the Odyssey, where the poet's role was to tell the national story truly, which often means with all the ambiguity of this story, right? With all the concealment, with all the inauthenticity, and with all the beauty as well. And so I don't know that I can give you the recipe. I do think that reading great texts, for those of you who are, globe, and already the fact that you're in this program, you're global citizens,
Yeah.
like Lowell wanted to be a global citizen. I think global citizens have to be subtle, have to be attuned to the complexity of true stories. And what is amazing about this one to me is that it's a very American poem,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, it's about Washington,
Yeah.
but it really applies to societies everywhere.
Yeah, totally agreed. Because if you go to any cities around the globe, yeah, the capital city and the way it is projecting every small bits of it, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you. Thank you.
And that
Shay.
Yes, and that brings us to about time. I do want to say absolutely amazing session today, Lisa.
Thank
I
you.
love the change of pace because usually we're so very leadership, entrepreneurship, job
No.
focused. So it's really nice to take a moment to step back and really just analyze some poetry, take a moment and really think about some of these words that are being used, what feelings are being brought up.
Great.
I also
I'm
love that you
glad.
turned a lot of the learners' questions back on them and asked them what they think.
Yeah.
So absolutely wonderful today. Thank you
Well,
so much.
thank you. I loved it. I'd love to. I'm honored and I so enjoyed. I wish I'd talked much less so that we could have done much more of this conversation. Maybe you'll invite me again. I'll get to talk less and listen more because I
Oh yeah.
really learned from it.
Yeah, you will definitely hear from us again. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all.
Yes. All right. Thank you. All right. So with that, that brings our masterclass today to a close. You should have seen in the chat both Morgan and I have shared the attendance link for today's session. Make sure that you're signed into your Aspire account before filling out the attendance form. I'm sorry we were not able to get to everybody's questions today, but remember in your attendance form, there is a section for additional feedback that we do share with the faculty. So if you have any additional questions that you would like to share or additional comments that you'd like to share along with the faculty, please put that in your attendance form and we'll make sure to forward that along. A couple of last minute notices, well, not last minute, but last notices. This attendance link will also be made available on your Discord server under the Professor New chat channel. And you'll also find the recording of this session and the attendance form under resource recordings on your Module 2 website. There was a masterclass earlier. You'll see that attendance form in those same places as well. So again, that form will close soon. So make sure if you've attended that masterclass and you would like to get your attendance, fill that form out. And attendance form for this class will also be made available on that site. Again, you have 3 hours to fill out the attendance form. So again, 3 whole hours to fill that out. If you miss it and you weren't able to fill it in within those 3 hours, you'll have to attend another master class. All right, I'm going to share it one more time in the chat for everybody. Please make sure that you're grabbing the attendance link before you leave the session. And with that, that brings us to a close. Thank you all so much for joining today. We hope that you all enjoyed today's masterclass, and we hope to see you in another one soon. Thank you.